Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I trust you're all safe and well during these challenging times. My name is Martin Ross and I'm the head of transactional banking at NAB. And our team is in business for our customers like you to make the complex world of payments simpler. This is achieved through three key pillars. First of all, cash flow innovation. Secondly, simplified business workflow. And third, greater visibility and control over payments. One of the great ways that we support delivery for our customers is through key strategic partnerships. And it's my great pleasure today to welcome you to this presentation in conjunction with our expense management partner, Freedom, on our enhanced functionality to flexi-purchase called ePayables. This unique partnership between NAB and Freedom began almost 20 years ago when we saw a gap in the market for providing suitable expense management tools for our business customers. And at this time, we provided our purchasing and our corporate cards to customers ranging from small and medium-sized enterprises right up to government, education, and institutional-sized customers. Regardless of their size, all talked frequently of their frustrations of having to manually collect receipts, reconcile against our paper statements, and manually performing reimbursements while managing risk. In 2018, Freedom was purchased by Visa, the largest card issuer in the world and one of NAB's key strategic partners. We have tailored today's webinar towards our customers within the government sphere, and we'll aim to provide you with examples of how customers such as yourself are using ePayables. The presentation will be provided by Don Supplice, who is the National Channel Manager at Freedom, and will run for approximately 35 minutes. After that presentation, Don will be joined by myself and one of my transactional specialists, Mikhail Barins, who directly supports the government, education and community customers for an interactive question and answer session. Also, one of my other specialists, Tom Hudson, will mediate this session. And today I'm really pleased that we're going to be joined by a special guest, Tracy Willisay, who's the systems accountant from City of Tea Tree Gully, who will give us a real life example of going through ePayables and some of their experiences to date. You do have the opportunity, if you've got questions throughout the presentation, to select the question and answers button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to type away as you go through the presentation, and we'll endeavour to answer as many questions as possible. But any questions left unanswered on the day will be collected by us and sent to all attendees after this call using our frequently asked question format, along with today's presentation in PDF format. There will also be an opportunity for you to reach out to your own banking relationship team should any questions come to mind after the presentation, or should you wish to set up a one-to-one presentation with your wider management team on your specific requirements, which we'll look to address. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to you, Don, for the main insights on this webinar. Over to you, Don.
Thanks, Martin. So welcome everyone, and as Martin said, thank you for joining us today for this educational webinar around flexi-purchase in local government. The aim of today's session is exactly that, to educate you in the government sectors on how other organisations are utilising flexi-purchase within their local government community, as well as the new functionality that we have brought into the product and how we've seen a lot of organisations benefit from that in this hard time. So what we're going to do today is basically just run you through a quick agenda. So what is flexi-purchase? For those of you who don't currently utilise flexi-purchase, we just want to give you a quick overview of what flexi-purchase has done to date and what a lot of organisations have used it for, and where we're sort of moving forward. We're going to look at some sort of why the need for this type of things in terms of the auditing processes and so forth that happen in local government. Some of the commonly seen challenges that we experience, and then what are the problems that they cause. As Martin mentioned, we're lucky enough today to have a real life customer joining us on this webinar to get their story on why the need for flexi purchase and the benefit that they've seen from that. Following Tracy, we'll run you through a couple of quick sort of solutions in terms of just use cases that we've seen this product benefit in the local government space. We'll then go through a quick demonstration on the quick and ease of actually using flexi purchase from the new product standpoint. We'll then give you some actual real life scenarios in where these things can actually be used. And finally, like Martin mentioned, we'll go through a Q&A session. So if we look at what is flexi purchase. So traditionally, flexi purchase has been a card management tool that NAB offered to their clients to assist with reconciliation, capturing receipts, and easy advanced sort of coding of transactions that generally are dealt with in a very manual process. If we look at it from the last couple of years, we saw a real gap in the market as to how we issue credit to individuals that don't necessarily have a card, or areas in which cards are traditionally shared in a business, which also causes a risk. So we developed two products, what we call dynamic limit management and procure to pay. So those two pieces of kit that we've brought to the market are basically giving an individual a zero balance credit card on the dynamically funded side of things, and giving them a request function that is pre-approved to allocate funds in real time. When you've got individuals that don't necessarily need a physical piece of plastic at any time because they're back office staff, they're making online purchases, what we can do is utilize what we call procure to pay, which is that ability to issue real-time virtual credit cards that can be used as either a single use or a multi-use mechanism. So that's a bit of background on where we've been and where we're going. Now, if we look at the actual need in local government, if we look at an audit that was conducted of 24 councils in 2017, only 5 of these councils were adequately reviewing credit card spend, and only 33% of them were collecting and storing the proper documents. Of 8 Western Australian councils that was audited in 2018, 4 of these councils regularly saw delays in reconciliation, 3 of the councils admitting to sharing cards, and over 35% of them lacked the supporting documentation with their expenses. And of a bunch of councils that were audited in Australia in 2020, only 30% of the card expenses were deemed appropriate use of public money. The review of expenses was deemed not effective in 45% of these cases. So what challenges do these pose to a business? So things that we generally hear from our customers are things like, we're volunteers, we don't want to be spending our own money and ask for reimbursements, but the organisation doesn't want to give them a card because they are a volunteer. I'm constantly having to borrow a card within the organisation, and again, that causes another risk. The organisation isn't willing to order or issue cards that have a traditional credit limit because either we don't see a need or there's just a real reluctance because we don't have the reporting capabilities behind it to monitor where that spend's going. Again, there's other issues in which we're spending our own money for certain suppliers. And then there's also the issue of having to capture receipts or hang on to receipts so that we can actually have that going against the transaction to justify the expense. So what we see as some key problems here is it's insufficient processes to review and manage card expenditure, which opens the organisation up to great risks. Some of the common themes that we see here are things like lack of visibility, delays in the acquittal process, and we've seen these go up to weeks or even months after a particular period has finished. The card sharing that I mentioned before, which has become a major issue with a lot of organisations, we commonly see cards are being shared around the office, and it could be up to 10 different people have that card number. The main issue with that is when you've got people sharing a card, you can't be confident that they haven't put that card number in a top drawer, and then when they leave the organisation in 6 months' time, take that number with them. We also come across a lot of unsuitable policies and lack of a review process. Ultimately, the issues that we see are that people see cards as the enemy, and improper management of the cards is actually the enemy. a watertight policy around this needs to be put in place. If we look at a case in 2018, there was a rural council that was publicly outed for having a loose credit card spending policy. What this amounted to was a substantial mismanagement of public resources. The Mayor and the CEO spent $70,000 across 18 months of ratepayer funded cards. And this included spending $5,000 on a roof climb at Adelaide Oval on a strategic planning day. Now, where we see a solution for this, I'll run you through in a few moments. But what we did want to do at this point is introduce Tracy Willisey, who, like Martin mentioned at the beginning of the call, is the systems accountant at the City of Tea Tree Gully. Now, we've asked Tracy onto the call today just so that she could have or give you an understanding of why there is a need for this within councils and where City of Tea Tree Gully saw some significant benefit to having this. So without further ado, I'll introduce Tracy. Tracy, thank you for joining us today. Sorry, Tracy, we're just still on mute.
There you go. Thanks, Don.
No problem. Yes, we can.
Thank you.
So thanks again for joining us. So I understand you've been working on the Flexi Purchase platform for the past 12 months.
Yes, we went live September 2019.
Fantastic. So it'd be really great just to get an understanding, Tracy, of I guess what the problems that the City of Tea Tree Gully were facing when they looked at implementing Flexi Purchase, and I guess what you've sort of seen, the good, the bad and the ugly along the journey that Tea Tree Gully have been on.
Yeah, so obviously some of the things that you've mentioned, so the reason why we wanted to upgrade, because we were using Flexi Purchase previously, but we wanted to upgrade because we wanted to improve our efficiency of processing our expense transactions. So processing them online and being able to upload and attach receipts to individual expenses. Also to have more up-to-date reporting on our accounts, because the approved transactions are getting loaded into our finance system more frequently rather than just at the end of the month. Also to reduce processing costs, because we wanted to change from the way that we pay. So we pay more on a credit card rather than by invoice, and also to reduce the amount of paperwork. So we're not holding physical receipts. So that was the major reasons around that. So our journey with the upgrade actually began in September 2018, and I joined the team in March 2019 when a pilot was being put together. There were 50 people that were in the pilot, and they came from all areas of the business, and that included the CEO and also one of the directors. And now we've got approximately 120 accounts on the system. We've only actually got a handful of users who are using virtual cards, but the staff who've been given virtual cards, the reason is because they only purchase infrequently, and also they only purchase over the internet. So it's not really beneficial for them to have a physical card, but obviously they're still able to spend on a card with virtual cards, which has been really good. As mentioned, we've been live since September 2019. And what we do, we receive a number of interface files from Flexi Purchase, and we receive those twice a month, and they're of the approved transactions, and they get loaded into our finance system. At the end of the month, we use the accrual file that we receive to actually create our month-end accrual journal, which has been really helpful for us. And we also receive a file that contains the images of the receipts from the system. Currently, we don't do anything with those files. However, we're implementing a new finance system later this year, and we're looking to import those images as well. So those images will be against the transactions in our finance system. Now, before we went live, there was a couple of concerns, especially from our approvers, in terms of thinking that the approval process would take a lot longer because they were used to doing the approvals at the end of the month and they just have a stack of documentation and do the approvals. And also they were concerned about some staff not being able to use the system because of computer literacy, etc. However, since go live, we've had less data entry errors because we've had security put on our account codes. We actually restricted the account codes that our users could see, so that's helped with data entry. Not having our users hold all their receipts has been a great improvement because there's less paperwork, so that helps everybody. Obviously, we've had an increase in the true financial position throughout the month because the transactions are loaded more frequently. And having the accruals files to aid with the month-end process, I'm creating the accrual journal, that's been an improvement as well, so that's made it more efficient. And our users like to use the app, and lots of users, they use the app to take photos of the receipts and then attach them to their transactions, and they can also process their coding of the claims via the app, and lots of users prefer to use the app rather than using their desktop. So that's been really good because it's been really simple to use for them. The fact that there's automatic reminders in the system to let users know that they've got transactions to code or they've got transactions that need to be approved. And we've got a tight time frame. We're doing 24-hour turnaround for coding and then approving. And having the ability to create custom reports and custom reminders has been helpful for the team. And also for the approvers to actually question the card holders via the system rather than sending emails throughout the organization. It's actually about the individual transactions. And also, because you can attach the receipts to an expense transaction, not only can you attach the receipts, you can attach other supporting documentation as well. So some managers like you to write War and Peace about transaction. We do not encourage that, but if they like that, you can actually write it on a separate sheet and attach that to the transaction as well. Obviously, if you've got FBT transactions where you've got entertainment and you need to list people who've attended an event, you can put that on separate documentation and attach it to the transaction as well. So that's been really good. And it turns out that the approval process was not as huge a commitment for the managers as they expected it to be. So that was really positive. And in terms of financial auditing, our finance business partners, we created a suite of reports for them to look at the transactions, so they're able to review the GST against documentation, also to review and ensure that they've got the correct documentation against a transaction, so they're actually actual invoices and not delivery dockets. So that's been really good. In terms of possible improvements, it would be good to be able to schedule reports as a standard. That's a separate module, is my understanding, so you'd have to purchase that. So it'd be nice for that to just be standard with the product. And the other thing, and I haven't spoken to my account manager about this, so we may be able to do it now. We currently receive multiple files, that because the files are based on the statement period, I would like it to just be one file for all the statement periods. And that's it for me at the moment, Don. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Tracy, and we really appreciate you sharing, and we appreciate you staying on to the end of the call to join the Q&A panel as well. So that's been fantastic. So if we jump into a couple more of the use cases that we commonly see in local government and councils, we've got a couple here. So one of the biggest issues that we see is that individuals within any organisation, whether it be local government or it may be education or anything like that, they don't have a card because they are infrequent users. So there's a reluctance for a business to give a card that has a consistent $2,000 limit, for example, when they may only be using that once or twice in any given month. So they're generally spending their own money. If they have to travel, they're issued cash or checks, and then they have to go and deposit that into their bank accounts. What we've seen dramatically change after we launched the dynamically funded card is that reluctance of issuing a card gone, because what we can do is we can actually issue them with these dynamically funded cards. So we have a couple of councils that have taken this on board, and they're now passing out more cards because the spend against those cards is pre-approved. It only is allocated for the time that's needed. So if you've got traveling employees, what they can do is actually log into the system and say, hey, I need access to X amount of funds for this particular week because I'm traveling to a rural area and I'm going to need access to funds. As soon as the approval is made, that card is dynamically funded for that particular week. And then at the end of that week, the card drops back down to zero. Another issue that we've been seeing, and this actually happened to one of our clients last year, was a need to be allocating cards to things like Facebook advertising or online accounts in which that card is opened up to risk by people being able to get the card details through that website. And the issue is having to cancel these cards when they are compromised. So by one card being compromised, we had 26 cards that were linked to a Facebook advertising account that had to be cancelled in one particular swoop. Now, the issue with this is if you're cancelling 26 cards in one particular time, you've then got to reissue those cards. You've then got 26 individuals that don't have access to credit for the period that they're waiting for a new card. So what we've started to look at doing is rolling out Procure to Pay, which is that virtual credit card, because those accounts don't need a physical piece of plastic, they just need a card number associated with them. In some instances, we can roll this out as a single-use card if it's just a once-off over the internet payment, or it may be a multi-use card that's set up against that Facebook advertising account that lasts for a 12-month period. The beauty of the virtual card is once the card number expires, so whether that's a single use or a multi-use, the card is then gone and can't be used again. So what we might do now is I'm going to jump into a demonstration of the product, and I'm going to show you what it's like to raise both a virtual credit card, but also the ease of actually allocating funds to a dynamically funded card. So let's just jump in to a browser here. Okay, so what we're going to do is basically give a user access to Flexi Purchase, whether they have it today or not. And they're simply going in and they're going to put in a request. So when I go into the system, I've got the option here to create a request for particular spend. So I can put in a description of what I'm requesting. So let's say, for example, that it's traveling. Now, if we're looking at the dynamically funded card, I have that option here to put in a date range. So like I mentioned before, if I'm going to be traveling for a week, I could put in a week here. And then when I click on next, I'm then taken through to these different categories. And as a lot of you have probably seen in your current use of Flexi Purchase, we use these spend wizards to allocate coding and different policies and things like that. So if I'm just looking at a credit limit increase, I can go in here and put in a balance of how much I want to request. Now, when I click on next, what that does is it runs a generic general ledger code over the top of the transaction that'll carry through with the transaction itself once it's made. I've then got the option here to go in and select my dynamically funded corporate card that the funds are going to be allocated to. So when I click on next and I submit that, my manager's going to get a notification saying, hey, Don needs his corporate card topped up, and those funds will be allocated upon approval. The other piece that we have to this is the ability to raise a request for a virtual card. So again, I can put in here a reason for the the request. If I've got justification, so if I'm paying an invoice or something like that, I could add this at this point as well. Otherwise, what I can do is I can go back in and add that to the transaction later. Now, in this particular item, we're going to say that we're purchasing procurement items. And let's put in a valid amount. Again, we're clicking on next. And now this time it's going to give me the option of a virtual card based on the request itself. Now, what you can see here is we've also got these allowed merchant category groups. So dependent on the different types of categories we put in, we can actually restrict the card usage to specific merchant groups. So for this particular one, it's actually only allowing me to spend it with airlines, auto rentals, and hotels. So you would assume that that would be associated with the travel. Now, when I hit submit, what's going to happen is a notification is going to be sent off to my manager saying that I've requested these funds. Now, that notification is going to be through email, but also through a push notification if they're using the app on the mobile device. They can then go in and see the request that's been put in. So you can see I've got both the request there for travel for my dynamically funded card, but I've also got the online purchase request for the virtual card. For the purpose of showing you what this looks like, I'm just going to approve the virtual card at this point. And I'm just clicking on approve selected items. And then again, straight back the other way, the user is going to get a push notification through the mobile app, as well as an email notification saying that they can now log in and view that corporate card. So when the user logs back in, the request that they had put in is going to be approved. So I'm just going to go into that request. And I can see the online purchase there has been approved. And then I'm just going to get the option here to go and retrieve my virtual card. Once I've put in my password, I'm then provisioned with a virtual credit card in real time. As you can see there, it has a 16-digit PAN and expiry date and a CVV number. So I can now copy those details, pop them into a website, and once that transaction has been processed against that particular card, the card number will vanish because it was a single-use card that we've requested. So where are some of these cards able to be used? So if we look at the example of subscriptions and licenses, all organizations have things like Salesforce, Microsoft licensing, so Office 365 licensing, it may be LinkedIn accounts, Norton antivirus, all these types of things can be used through the use of a virtual card. Things like online purchases, logistics, Australia Post, especially in the council area, Bunnings, things like that. You've got delivery services through things like Toll and Linfox, but like any organisation as well, you've still got office supplies through Officeworks and the likes. When you've got things like event hire, travel, marketing costs, again, all councils are going to have these types of expenses, and all of these things are available to pay online. Probably the biggest one in your particular industry are the government payments. So we think that to the likes of registration for our fleet vehicles, all of the tax information, all of that sort of stuff can be paid online through a virtual card. And then again, just like any other organisation or even just at home, you've got things like electricity, you've got things like phone bills, all of those types of bills that come in that can be paid against a card. Okay, so what we're going to do at this point is I'm just going to introduce a colleague of ours, Tom Hudson, who's going to facilitate the Q&A session. And we're going to be joined back by Tracy, Martin, and Mikhail.
Thanks very much, Don. And as you just mentioned, great to have Tracy, Martin, and Mikhail joining yourself and myself. And let me say there's some great questions already coming through. So if you are able to go down to the Q&A bar at the bottom of the screen. You can type in a question. It can be anonymous, so if there's something that you want to ask, but don't want everyone to wonder why you're asking that, then please go about that. I think I'd like to start off with a question for you, Mikhail, and I think this is a good one because it is one that we've been asked quite a few times, but it is AUSTRAC required for dynamic limit managed cards or virtual cards? I think by AUSTRAC, they're talking about what we would call Know Your Customer, or KYC, 100-point identification check.
And that's a great question as well. I'll start off by talking about physical cards, because physically issued cards, as far as our corporate card solution goes, we as a bank have delegated or created a delegation which will allow an organisation to issue cards through online banking or NAB Connect. How that works is, as part of the setup process for physical cards, you will delegate a person within the organisation to be the security officer who can conduct 100-point ID checks on behalf of the bank. So rather than your staff or employees going into a branch to go through that process, we pass that information on to yourself. You conduct the 100-point check. So long as you store that information internally, we won't require it, and you can then issue cards directly through your online banking for physical pieces of plastic. When it comes to virtual cards, the process is far simpler because you're effectively issuing a card from a facility which is being tokenized. You can issue cards, or individuals can request virtual cards at any point in time without having to go through a 100-point ID check. So in Don's example, you would have seen the card name or the person's name on the card was NAB ePayables Pilot. If, for instance, it was a local council, the card name would actually be made out to the local council rather than to an individual. And that's why an AUSTRAC check isn't required.
Fantastic, Mikhail. A question I think, Martin, would be best given to you, given your length and breadth of travel that you were doing up until the COVID period as the National Head of Transactional Banking for the NAB. Is it common to have cards being shared in the industry of government and local government and education?
Yeah, that's the question. It has been quite a pattern that we've seen right across the country of cards being shared, and obviously there's quite a bit of risk that's inherent in that, and we've seen that through a number of audit reports, not only within the government sector but also in other sectors as well. What we've found, obviously, is with this particular solution is by no limit really on the number of physical cards or even virtual cards. It's really giving our government bodies really the ability to control who actually is spending and have that full visibility as well, and particularly when they're looking at pre-approvals for incidental spends as well as frequent spend as well.
Fantastic, Martin. Thank you very much for that. And I will just mention to those that are watching at home, we are all dialing in for our respective homes, and internet connections can be a little bit touchy. So apologies if we do go missing. I've got about 4 building sites around my apartment at the moment, so you might also hear the odd hammer or jackhammer. A question I think for you, Don, on the virtual cards, do you know the exact amount you're spending? For example, can you request a virtual card for $100 but only spend $90, or use that card multiple times if say, a $100 amount was allocated up until you had utilised the funds?
Yeah, great question. So when we talk about the difference between the two types of virtual card that we've got, obviously we were speaking about a single use and a multi-use. So with a single use virtual card, if I've made a request for $100, and I've only spent 90 of it, once that transaction is processed, the card itself will vanish. So the $10 remaining will simply be remaining in your facility. It won't actually have been taken and allocated to that card. If, in the sense of a multi-use card, you've requested $100, made a purchase for $75, you can then go and make another purchase for another $25. So they're the differentiators between the two cards. But yeah, good question.
And I think this question follows on very nicely, Don, so I'll throw this to you as well. How close are you to allowing for a virtual card to fall directly into my mobile wallet? So I'm guessing that's sort of an Apple Pay or a Google Play type setup.
I think this is one of the questions that always follows. We seem to get this from every group. So we were and are working very hard to create, so Mikhail sort of alluded to, a virtual card is creating a token of your facility, which is ultimately going to be your sort of centralized card. What we need to do to drop it into a mobile wallet is create a token of the token. So we are working very hard with the backing of NAB and Visa and Freedom to create this. Pre-COVID, we were hoping that we would be on track for the end of this year, but it looks now that to be pushed to potentially mid next year. But yeah, please understand that it is at the top of our priority list.
Thanks, Don. The next question I actually am going to split for a question to Mikhail first, and then also to Tracy, just for some, sort of a real world example. Tracy, I don't know if you're able to turn your microphone and camera on, if that's all right, but Mikhail, the first part of the question is, do I have to, am I restricted to giving either of these cards to employees only, or if we have volunteers in the organisation, can they also be set up with access to this? And I think after that, if the answer is yes, which I know it is yes, so we might then throw it to Tracy and just see whether there's anyone outside of her immediate financial team that's also utilising these cards.
So to your answer to your question, Tom, initially, yes, you are able to provide these cards to volunteers. It's obviously up to the delegation of your organisation as to how you want to allocate those cards and to whom you'd like those cards allocated to. But there's nothing in our terms and conditions that say you can't. In a lot of cases, a lot of local governments will have volunteers for, specialised industries, aged care, volunteering work that they do. And that's where we do see a lot of these services being provided to them, because often in local government, one of the key pieces of informational key things that they wanted to look at this point in time is reducing cash within the organisation. And this is definitely a way of doing so.
Thanks for that, Mikhail. And Tracy, just repeating, I guess, the second part of the question, are there any employees or sort of community volunteers within your council that you could see or currently are utilising either virtual cards or the $0 plastic cards?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of employees that are using the virtual cards because they do only purchase online. And then also you talked about the dynamic limits as well. We have had several employees up their card limits. So one good example of that was for car registrations, because we register our vehicles at the same time each year, and so we would have to increase the limit, and it was quite an involved process. But now, because we've got flexi purchase, it's quite simple and it's within the hands of the employee's manager rather than having to go through finance. So that's been a nice, efficient process for us.
Thank you so much for giving us some real-world example there. Obviously, there's some fans out there, because I've got another question that's just come through for you, specifically for you, Tracy. The question is, you mentioned that you have moved a lot of transactions away from invoices and cards. Do you have a threshold amount that must use the card for?
Yes, so what we're trying to do, and it's an ongoing process, so it's not fully complete yet, but we're looking at any transactions that are below $1,000 to be paid for on credit card rather than being invoiced, and we're encouraging our employees to do that if obviously suppliers take credit cards.
Thank you, Tracy. A question that I might throw over to you, Mikhail. How do you deal with the need to raise a purchase number? Do you just not use the card? So I guess that's touching on what Tracy out. But have you got other examples that come across a specific question?
It's another good question. And I think, to Tracy's point, a lot of customer meetings that Don and I have attended, particularly in local government, they were all going through processes of reducing purchase orders as a whole and moving, purchase orders to card if possible. So in the initial screen you saw from Don where he's initially requesting funds, that screen allows you to both note down if there's a purchase order number as an example, as well as add in an invoice. So if you've got an invoice and a purchase order, you can actually note that. So as part of your process, when you're pulling that information back into the finance system, that's available for your organisation to recall as well.
Thanks, Mikhail.
I might just add to that. Sorry, Tom.
No issues, Don.
One of our larger councils here in Victoria as well, they utilise this so heavily that a comment they made to me once was, if we could get to the point in which we could walk into a dealership and buy new utes for the fleet using a credit card, they would, because the visibility that they get immediately of that transaction being made, but also the processes that it eliminates from not using purchase orders is huge to them. So they're actually, like to Tracy's point, where they're looking at doing purchases under $1,000, I think they moved theirs up to anything under $10,000. If you could put it on card, put it on card.
Thanks, Don. A question, Martin, for you once again with your National Head of Transactional Banking hat. And one that I do like, it's a question I'd certainly ask straight up if I wasn't currently using this. Does NAB have a lot of councils already cards?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a great number of customers, councils using it right across the country. And we do a lot of sharing of information and have hosting seminars where we got a lot of exchange of information, and also we like to bring in the voice of those councils. So it's great to have Tracy as a great example today come on to share it, because it's nothing better for you to hear one of your peers actually go through what was the pains and the issues that we're trying to resolve, but the implementation, then how the efficiencies are actually being realised, rather than us, talking about it verbatim wise. So we're very happy to put those councillors that maybe don't have a particular solution in place at the moment, to connect them with other councils that have similar issues in mind as well. So that's part of when we have a one-to-one conversation with either like Tom or Mikhail or one of our other colleagues across the country, that we really want to understand what are you looking to try and either solve or improve, and then match you up with other councils as well. And not even other councils, other industries, and that maybe is a specific problem that we're actually facing as well. So there's other enhancements that we're doing into Flexi Purchase that talk to lifting the bar of spend, talked about $10,000, even higher than that. So we're seeing a lot of our corporates as well look at how do they actually maximize the efficiencies from putting higher spend onto card as well too.
Thanks for that, Martin. It is interesting. I do a bit of travel up in regional Victoria, up into the Mallee, and interestingly, the one question that came to me that started this type of conversation, everyone's unique, was when are you going to create receipts that don't fade in the sun? A place like Mildura has a lot of sun, and we said, well, actually, we don't necessarily need to deal with the receipt, but we can give you technology that allows you to take a photo of that receipt when you've spent it, and then that way it doesn't need to sit in the car and it expires. So I think a question just to throw over to you, Don, and perhaps a chance for you to just separate the two products that we've been talking about today, and the different types of uses that you would have with them. But it is, does the dynamic / virtual card appear on mobile devices if I want to make an in-store purchase? So I guess just maybe if you're able to differentiate between what we would call card not present and card present.
Yeah, so to that point, and it is a good question, I guess we sort of go back to the question earlier around, are we able to drop a virtual card into like an Apple Wallet or Android, for example? And at the moment, the answer is no. So this is sort of the key differentiator between the dynamically funded credit card versus a virtual card. So what we say at the moment is with virtual cards, it's all card not present transactions. So anywhere I don't need to physically present a card. Now, that's not to say that if you took a mobile device into a store with the virtual card on it through the app, they may accept it, but that merchant is sort of running the risk that it's a phony card because it doesn't have a name on it. It doesn't appear as a legitimate card because it will just come up with the business name and a number. So there would be a huge reluctance, I would imagine, for a merchant to process that card. So what we generally say is if you've got users that at some point they would need the function of presenting a physical piece of plastic, give them a dynamically funded card. If it's always going to be online over the phone, then look at the virtual card side of it. So hopefully that sort of separates them a little clearer for the question.
Listen, I think it does, Don, and we are seeing some slight changes with more and more people keying in cards for card not present transactions when someone's over the phone, especially with the times that we're in at the moment with COVID. But the good thing is you've got two separate products that work very well together under the Flexi Purchase banner that can help separate and do their distinctive jobs. While I've got you, Don, and you might have to unmute your microphone, but another question, and one that we do also get asked quite often, is if I have a third-party EMS, by that will be expense management software or system that isn't Flexi Purchase, is this available as a standalone module, or is it something that I'm not allowed to get access to?
No, definitely. So we actually have quite a few customers that we have spoken to that have had third-party expense management solutions. The good thing about this is it can be embedded into your current Flexi Purchase environment with that request functionality, or we can build it as a standalone offering.
Thanks for that, Don. Now, Tracy, a question I'm going to go to you with, just once again for the voice of the real world outside of NAB. How easy is it really to set up a new card and allocate a limit?
Well, seeing as I don't have to do it, it's really easy. So it is actually easy. We obviously have to fill in the standard forms for an actual card. And as mentioned, we've got somebody who is on site to do the 100-point check. And then somebody goes in NAB Connect and updates the details. And we've had cards in less than a week come in the office. For virtual cards, it's instantaneous. You just go on the system and process them. So we've had really good experiences in terms of the cards. So yeah.
Fantastic. And oddly enough, another question that's just come in, which I think follows on, Tracy, from what you were just talking about. Is it easy to log on and amend card limits? For example, issue someone a card limit that's $5,000, but 2 weeks later, increase this if they've got some larger spends coming up in their part of the business.
Yeah, so again, just in terms of a temporary limit increase, so we'll use the dynamic limit increases. So basically the user just makes the request, and very similar to the virtual card request that we've demonstrated, and then that approval goes to their manager. As soon as their manager's approved it, their limit's updated, and you actually select a period for that limit to be relevant for. So again, really simple.
Thank you very much for that, Tracy. Don, a question for you. What is the maximum time length a virtual card will last for?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question again. So there's, I guess, two different ways to look at it. Generally, if it's a single-use card, you'd probably allocate the balance for a month, because generally, if it's a single-use card, I'm wanting to make that purchase really quickly. If it was a multi-use card, and if we go back to the example of things like subscriptions where they're ongoing and so forth, you can actually allocate that virtual card for any time up to the same period that a normal Visa card would be available for. So whether that's sort of 3 or 4 years, you could put an expiry date that far out.
Thanks for that, Don. Mikhail, as the relationship manager and the one who many people feel set the prices, this question is, how expensive is a virtual card, and how does the costs work if I want to allocate more than normal?
It's a great question, Tom, and I think that one might be from an accountant. In terms of the cost associated, obviously each module within Flexi Purchase does have an upfront cost associated to it. in terms of issuing virtual cards, to Don's point earlier, the card itself is tokenized from a head facility. So you can issue one card at 1,000 cards. There's only one fee associated to that, and that's $6.82. And that's not for $6.82 times 1,000. That's just one fee of $6.82 for all virtual cards issued under the facility.
Fantastic, Mikhail. I won't ask you how you got the 82 cents, but maybe that's a question for a later time. Another question, Don, that's come in, and one from someone who I'm guessing is more on the marketing side of their local government body. I've used virtual cards before, but I've had issues with them when it's come to social media type sites, being Instagram and Facebook, which we're doing more and more advertising and awareness raising through. Will the NAB cards work on these type of American-based companies?
Yes, the short answer is yes, it will. So we had, and going back to the use cases that I brought up before, the Facebook advertising one where I spoke about the 26 cards having to be cancelled was actually one of our councils having to cancel 26 cards in one hit. And they are now utilising the virtual card facility as a way of paying for those online social media accounts.
Thanks for that, Don. Now we've got one more question. I was just about to say everyone can have 8 minutes back in their day, but let me just read this out. The question is, how quickly or how easy is it to lift the overall limits of physical and digital cards? For example, if I have a facility that's $100,000 and need a higher future limit, what is this process and time frame? I think, Mikhail, that's probably best allocated to you as the transactional banker in the room.
Thanks, Tom. Another great question. So the process around, I mean, if it's for an individual card, that's fairly simple. To Tracy's point, it's effectively what you saw in Don's example. If you're talking about the overarching facility and the question had $100,000 as an example, there is a financial process to go through. So ordinarily we'd need a privacy and consent document to confirm that you'd like to proceed with increasing your overall limit. Then work through financial information. Ordinarily, the process end to end to increase a corporate card limit is roughly 4 weeks to do so for the overarching facility.
Thanks, Mikhail. And the final question, which I'm going to throw to our very special guest, Tracy. Tracy, since you've implemented this, have you had any concerns from a fraud point of view, given cards seem to be more regularly used now in your business?
No, we did actually have a fraud on one of the cards, and the bank got in touch with us before we knew about it. So no, there's been no concerns around it.
Fair enough. Listen, that's good to hear. That's pretty much what we do on Saturday and Sunday nights. We just to protect our loyal customers. That's it from me and from the Q&A. I might throw back to Martin, but once again, thank you very much to Tracy, Mikhail and Don. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Tom. And I'd just like to say a few thanks in closing. First of all, a massive thank you to Tracy for taking the time as one of your peers in the industry to share her amazing experiences and journey today and being very candid with us. So it's always a pleasure and a privilege to hear from one of our customers. So thank you, Tracy, on behalf of NAB, and we thank you for your custom. Secondly, I'd like to thank Don for running through the session as well. He's provided a lot of key insights, a lot of touch points, but really where we'd love to help you more is to understand your key areas for improvement or areas of pain that you would like to face into, and Don will be able to share more of that with yourself, including we didn't get a chance today, but to look at actually the mobile app in action, which is pretty impressive as well for your end users and authorizers. And also thank Tom and Mikhail for the hosting and also the questions. But my final thanks really goes to you, our customers who've joined us today for the last 55 minutes. We like to bring insights that's going to further improve cash flow, reduce your workflow, and improve your controls. As I said up front, we're really in the business of making the complex world of payments simpler. Do reach out to your banker or your specialist if you have any further questions or wish to discuss this further or have a further presentation tailored specifically to your organization. But at 2:25 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we'll give you 5 minutes back in your day and bid you farewell, and thank you once again. Thanks everyone. Goodbye.